Welcome to the silent corners of the night, where every shadow hides a story, and every story hides a truth you were never meant to hear. Welcome to the dark, quiet side of night. You are safe here for now. Breathe in and let the world fade out. Keep your eyes closed if you want. Listen to the soft rain, to the slow air of the room, to my voice. Tonight, these stories will move like shadows on a wall. Not loud, not fast, just close enough to feel real. They are simple and clear, like a memory you almost forgot, and a truth you wish you hadn't found. If sleep comes, let it take you. The night will keep watch. Sweet dreams, if you can. I moved into the building at the end of winter. The hallway smelled like dust and warm metal, the kind of smell you get from old radiators and old paint. The landlord was fast with the keys and slower with the smile. He told me, "Most folks are quiet here," and then he paused like he almost wanted to add something else but changed his mind. My apartment was small, but it had a big window. From it I could see the streetlight outside and a thin slice of sky. At night, the light fell across the floor like a narrow path. I liked that. It made the place feel less empty. On my first night, I heard doors open and close on the floor above. I heard a cough, a TV, and a soft sound like shoes being dragged. City sounds, normal. I unpacked the basics, made tea, and stood by the window until the tea went cold. I slept on a mattress on the floor, wrapped in a hoodie, and told myself, new start. The next morning, I met him. I was locking my door when I felt someone behind me. I turned and saw a man in a grey sweater and clean jeans, maybe early 40s, maybe a little older. His hair was short, almost too neat. He had a face you forget as soon as you look away. Not ugly, not kind, just blank. "New here?" he said. "Yeah," I said. "Just moved in last night." He looked at my door number like he wanted to remember it. "I'm across," he said, tilting his head toward 3B. "Name's Mark." I said my name. And he repeated it once, softer, like he was trying the taste of it. "Quiet building," he went on. "Take your trash out before 9. The chute gets stuck." "Thanks," I said. He waited. I thought the talk was done, but he didn't leave. He looked at my lock, then at me. "Do you work late?" he asked. "Sometimes." He nodded and smiled for the first time. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I notice things," he said. I didn't know what he meant, so I laughed a little and said goodbye. I felt his eyes on my back as I walked to the stairs. That night, the hallway felt different. I got home at 11 with a bag of groceries and a headache. The elevator was slow, so I took the stairs. On my floor, the lights were low and humming. My door was at the end of the hall, past Mark's. As I walked by, I heard a soft click, like a peephole cover shifting. I didn't look. I didn't want to start something on my second day. I put my bags down inside, locked the deadbolt, and turned on the small lamp by the window. The room felt calm again. I cooked eggs, ate standing up, scrolled on my phone, and told myself I'd sleep early. Around midnight, I heard it, a slow, steady step outside my door. One step, a pause, another step. The sound was soft, but in the quiet, it felt loud. I muted my phone and stood very still. The steps stopped right outside my apartment. I stood there for a full minute, counting in my head, waiting for the steps to keep going. They didn't, nothing. Then, a faint sound like a breath close to the crack at the bottom of my door. I told myself it was nothing. Old buildings make sounds, people walk late. I turned the TV on low and tried to ignore it. After a while, I heard the steps again, this time moving away. I slept, but it was the kind of sleep that breaks easy. In the morning, there were two things by my door. A flyer for a pizza place and a small piece of white thread caught on the bottom edge of my doorframe, like someone's sleeve had brushed against it. I noticed it because I don't miss details like that. I picked it up, rolled it between my fingers, and let it fall into the trash. That evening, I ran into the landlord by the mailboxes. I almost asked him if there were any issues on my floor, but I didn't want to sound like a problem on week 1. He asked me if the heat was okay. I said yes. I asked him if the locks were new. He said, "Last year," and his eyes skipped to something behind me, and then back, like he didn't want to hold my gaze too long here in the lobby. When I stepped out of the elevator back on my floor, the hallway was empty. I walked toward my door and felt that mild rise of skin on my arms, the one you get when someone is looking at you. Mark's door had a peephole with a dull brass ring. It looked like an old eye. I unlocked my door fast, slipped in, locked it, and exhaled. not fear, just that small alert feeling you can't name. I put water on for pasta and opened my laptop at the tiny table by the window. I was halfway through an email when I heard a soft knock. 3 taps, not loud, careful. I froze. Another 3 taps followed, the same soft rhythm. I went to the door and spoke without opening it. Yes? Sorry, a voice said. Mark's voice. Didn't mean to bother you. Your package came to my door by mistake. I looked through the peephole. The hallway looked stretched and fish-eyed through the glass. I couldn't see him, only a shoulder in grey. I didn't order anything, I said. It's small, he said. Might be a gift. I kept the chain on and opened the door 1 inch. He stood too close. In his hand was a small, plain cardboard box with no label, just tape. He smiled that small smile again and held it up. I think it's yours, he said. I don't think so, I said. He tilted his head, like a dog. Strange, he said. I notice things. I thought you were waiting on something. I'm not, I said, and I tried to close the door. His hand came up fast, palm flat against the door. Not hard, not pushing, just there. I'll take it back then, he said, and lowered his hand. He stepped back, still smiling, and I closed the door all the way and locked it. I stood there with my palm on the wood, feeling my own heartbeat. I heard his steps go soft down the hall. Or I told myself I heard that. I didn't cook pasta after that. I sat with the TV on and the volume low. Every now and then, I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Nothing. At 1 a.m., I turned off the TV and tried to sleep. The streetlight cut a thin path on the floor again. I watched it until my eyes watered. I must have drifted off, because the next thing I heard was a whisper of paper, like a page turning. I sat up. The sound came from the door. I tiptoed closer and looked through the peephole. I saw the hallway, empty, light humming. Then, something moved at the very bottom of the view. A grey sleeve, too close to the floor. The sleeve slid away, and I heard that soft paper sound again, like someone was slowly feeding a note under my door. I spoke before I could think. Mark? No answer. The sleeve vanished. Footsteps, very slow, moved away. I waited 1 minute, then 2. Then I unlatched the chain and bent down. A small sheet of white paper lay just inside the door. No writing. Just a rough little circle drawn in pencil, right in the center. A simple circle, not even closed all the way. I held the paper under the lamp. The pencil line had been pressed hard enough to dig into the page, like the hand that drew it was tense. I didn't sleep after that. The next morning, I slid the paper into a drawer and told myself I'd forget it. People are strange. It's a city. Not everything means danger. I went to work. I came back before dark. I told myself I'd make a plan if it happened again. At 9:37 p.m., 3 taps came at the door. Soft, careful, the same rhythm. I stood on the other side and didn't say a word. Something touched the bottom of the door, slow. That soft brush again, like fabric. Then a breath. Then 1 more paper sound. I didn't move. I waited until the steps were gone. When I picked up the new paper, my hands were shaking. This time, it wasn't a circle. It was a keyhole. A small, dark keyhole, drawn with the same heavy pencil hand. And for the first time since I moved in, I felt it. Not alertness, not nerves fear. The simple kind, the true kind. The kind that says someone is telling you a story, and you are inside it whether you want to be or not. I kept the paper with the keyhole in the same drawer as the circle. I told myself to throw them out, but I could not do it. I left them under a stack of old bills and closed the drawer fast, as if closing it could close the feeling too. It did not. All night, I heard small sounds that were probably pipes and wind, but my mind turned them into steps and coats and eyes. I slept in short drops and woke in the same second each time, with the streetlight line across the floor, looking like a mark that someone had drawn there while I was not watching. The next day, I changed my routine in small ways. I took the long way to the subway. I bought groceries at a different store. I stood in the lobby and checked my phone until the elevator doors began to close, so I could ride alone. On my floor, I paused by the stairwell and listened, then walked straight to my door without looking right or left. I felt the old alert prickle across my arms anyway. I stepped inside, locked the door, and stood for a few minutes in the quiet living room, waiting for my heartbeat to slow down to something that felt normal. I tried to cook and could not focus. I burned the first pan and cleaned it and tried again. I ate with the TV on mute. The room looked safe, but my mind kept returning to the soft taps, the paper, the heavy pencil hand. I tried to make it small. Maybe I was the strange one, saving the papers and reading meaning into nothing. Maybe the man across the hall liked to play with people. Maybe this building liked to play with people. I told myself all of that, but I did not believe it. I set an alarm for 10:30 and lay down early. I wanted to be awake if anything happened, but my body was tired and sank fast. At 10:30, I opened my eyes with a dry mouth and a heavy head. The room looked different from the angle of my pillow. The streetlight line still lay on the floor. The window showed a quiet slice of sky. The clock numbers glowed like a small red eye. I lay there and listened. I heard the refrigerator hum and stop. I heard the light in the hallway sing its low note. I heard 3 soft taps. I stood up and walked to the door, but I did not touch it. I stood there and watched the bottom edge. I watched the shadow line where the hallway light seeped in. My body felt like it had learned a new stillness that week. My breathing grew slow. I waited. I felt the brush of something soft against the bottom of the door. I heard the slide of paper. I waited longer. When I finally bent down, I did it like I was lifting a lid on something alive. The third paper showed a simple door drawn from the front. The outline was straight and hard. The knob was missing. The keyhole sat there, small and dark, where a knob should be. I could see the pressure marks again, carved into the paper like scratches. I stared at the door on the page until it felt real and the paper felt like wood. I placed the new page with the others. I stood at the window and looked at the street. The sidewalk was empty. A bus passed once. A person walked a dog without looking up. I tried to breathe slow. I told myself that the world outside was still normal and that my apartment was just a spot inside it, not a separate place where new rules applied. The morning came late with grey light and a dull sky. Work was a blur. I typed the same lines 2 times and erased them both times. Coffee felt like water. By the time I got back home, my body was heavy with the idea of the next soft knock. I decided to change something. I took a shower and left the bathroom light on with the door cracked, so the living room had 2 light sources instead of 1. I moved the small lamp closer to the door. I set my phone to record audio and placed it on the shoe rack. I did not know what I would do with a recording. I wanted proof for myself more than anything else. The hallway stayed quiet until 9:30. Then a slow step passed my door and went on. At 10 I heard a cough far away. At 10:30 I heard the soft taps again. My phone screen showed that the recorder was working. I stood still, as before. The paper slid under. The steps retreated. The 4th drawing showed a hallway. It was only lines and shade, but I recognized the proportions. A long rectangle, a ceiling fixture like a small disc, a door at the end, my door. The door in the drawing had a dark spot where the peephole would be, but the spot was bigger than a normal peephole. It looked like an eye. The pencil had pressed harder here, as if the hand slowed down to make the dark more real. I set the paper down with the others. I did not disturb the order. Circle, keyhole, door, hallway. I left the papers out on the table and stared at them until the lines began to swim. I pressed my fingers to my eyes and saw small light bursts. The room felt too quiet, even with the bathroom light and the street light and the refrigerator and the building's low hum. I turned on the TV without sound again. My own voice would have felt strange in that room, so I did not speak. At midnight, I checked the recording. The file showed a peak at the time of the taps. I listened with headphones. The sound was soft but clear. 3 taps, a slow breath, the rustle of paper, a faint scrape like fabric against wood, then faint steps. I listened a second time, then a third. On the 3rd time, I noticed something small that I had missed. There was a sound before the taps, very quiet, like someone lowering a weight to the floor and leaning on it. It could have been the air or the pipes. It sounded like a person who wanted to be close to the seam of the door, with a shoulder or a head pressed there. The next morning I printed a notice I found online about building security. It said that residents should not accept packages that were not labeled. It said to report noises if they caused concern. I taped the notice on the board near the mailboxes. Then I stood in the lobby and pretended to read my phone until the elevator doors closed. When I reached my floor, I looked at my own door from the far end of the hall. The wood looked normal. The metal plate around the knob looked normal. The small mark around the keyhole looked normal too. But now, my mind turned the word normal into a thin sheet that could hide anything. I unlocked my door and went inside. On impulse, I moved the small table and the lamp and placed a heavy chair against the door. It felt silly and also necessary. I did not want to sleep with a chair against the door for the rest of my lease. I told myself that I would do it only for one night. I told myself many things. At 9:30 I heard steps again, but they stopped at someone else's door. At 10 I poured tea and held the warm mug for a long time. At 10:20, a soft scrape ran along my door, just once, from top to bottom. The chair creaked as if it had been touched by the sound. No taps followed, no paper slid under. The scrape had the shape of a line in my mind, a single stroke, like the first paper with the circle, like a mark to say that the rules were changing. I waited until 11 and then turned off the lights, except the bathroom glow. I lay down and looked at the ceiling. I could feel the chair's presence like an animal, heavy and still. At some hour close to 1, I felt sleep moving toward me. That was when the building hum deepened, then cut out, and the apartment fell into a new silence. A moment later, I felt a pressure along the bottom of the door, but there was no paper sound. It felt like someone testing the shape of the wood with a small tool. The chair creaked again, softer. An edge of cold air came through the seam and slid along the floor toward my bed. I did not move. I did not breathe deep. I let my body pretend to be asleep. The pressure eased. A slow exhale passed under the door and spread over the room like a thin fog. The next morning I found nothing on the floor. The chair had moved an inch. The metal plate around the knob had a new, faint scratch that caught the light at a sharp angle. The peephole looked the same, but I could not bring my face to it. I backed away and sat on the edge of the bed with my hands on my knees. I made a plan then, simple and small. I would leave the apartment for a few hours that night and return at a different time than usual. I would stand at the far end of the hall for a minute before unlocking my door and listen to the building breathe. I would look at Mark's door without the peephole between us and see if anything in the shape of it told me more than I knew. That evening I stayed late at work, then walked the long way back. I climbed the stairs slowly and stood at the far end of the hallway with my back against the cool wall. The light hummed the same low note. The air smelled like dust and warm metal. Mark's door was closed. My door waited at the end like a line on a page. I stood there until my eyes watered and my legs began to shake. I watched for any change, a shadow at the bottom of a door, a breath in the air, a sound like a shirt moving against wood. Nothing came. I took a step forward, then another. I reached my door and saw a tiny white thread trapped under the edge of the metal plate, the way a first day had left a thread on the frame. I touched it. It broke. My mind tried to be calm and failed. Inside, I locked the door and placed the chair again. I sat at the table and put the 4 papers in a row: circle, keyhole, door, hallway. The order felt like a path. The path pointed toward the peephole and the line of the floor and the place where the chair pressed into the wood. I pushed the papers together so the lines almost met. The circle became the eye. The keyhole became the center. The door became mine. The hallway became the one I had just crossed. The path ended where I was sitting. I left the papers on the table and lay down with my shoes on. I set the recorder again. I closed my eyes and tried to let the rain sounds from my phone mask the hum of the building. The night moved slowly. When the taps came again, they did not come in a set of 3. They came only once. A single soft tap, patient and sure, like a person who no longer needed to introduce himself. I opened my eyes and watched the thin line of streetlight on the floor. It did not move. I knew without standing that a 5th paper was sliding under my door. I knew without looking that I would pick it up. I knew that the drawing would not be a shape this time. It would be a plan. Morning light made the hallway look harmless again. The building smelled like laundry and old paint. My door looked like any other door. I showered, dressed, and left for work with a small plan forming in my head. I would change small things, the way I did the day before. I would not walk past his door at the same times. I would not come home at the same hour twice in a row. I would not accept packages, papers, or help. I would become a quiet shape that could not be held. At lunch, I bought a small strip of tape and a pack of stick-on sensors from a hardware store. The man at the counter said nothing. Back home before dark, I placed one thin piece of clear tape across the bottom edge of my door, just inside, where it would catch if something slid under. I stuck one sensor high on the doorframe inside the apartment, the type that chirps when 2 magnets separate. I tested it once and then set it to silent mode with a light-only flash. I wanted signals only for me, not for anyone else. The hallway carried the same low light hum. His door looked the same. The peephole looked the same. On my table, the 4 drawings sat in a neat line. I added a 5th page from my own hand, a list of times: first taps, second taps, the longer scrape, the chair creak, the silence with weight. I wrote each detail in a simple block of text with neat numbers. Naming things felt like control. I cooked, ate, washed dishes, and set the chair back against the door. I placed my phone on record again. I moved the small lamp so that it shone on the bottom gap of the door. I turned off the TV. I breathed in and out until my shoulders loosened. The streetlight drew its thin path across the floor. I watched it like a clock. At 9:41 p.m., a faint shadow crossed the gap. It was nothing more than a passing change in the light. I did not move. At 10:06, a shape paused on the other side of the door, not touching, only present. I could not hear breath. I could not hear feet. Only the feeling of a person placed like a mark on the other side of the wood. The first signal came at 10:28. The tape ticked once, a tiny sound like a hair being pulled. I stared at the bottom edge. A paper slid under. The tape bent and held. The paper continued anyway, slow and steady, like the hand had learned how to push past new rules. The sensor light did not flash. The chain held. The chair did not move. The paper stopped halfway into the room and rested there, like a tongue. I waited a full minute before touching it. The paper showed a drawing of my door, as seen from inside the apartment. The chair was there. The chain was there. The lamp's small glow was there, represented by a tight cluster of pencil lines like a starburst. There was no person in the drawing. Only the objects and the door and the eye of the peephole drawn from the wrong side, too large, as if it could still look in. I placed the new page on the table and went back to the door. The shadow had not returned. The hallway hummed. My own apartment was so quiet that the sound of the refrigerator starting made me jump like a small animal. I laughed once without humor, just enough to make the air move, and then sat on the edge of the bed with my hands open on my knees. At 11:12, the chair gave a small sigh. Not a push, not a slide. The sound of weight moving near it, more than on it. The sensor light flickered once and died. The gap at the bottom of the door darkened for a second, then returned to normal. I watched the thin line of streetlight and felt my pulse in my fingertips. Midnight arrived and brought a long, empty space. I slept in short drops and woke with the exact same picture in my head each time. The peephole as an eye, the keyhole as a pupil, the circle as the iris. The papers on the table made a pattern I did not want to complete but could not stop tracing. The next morning, I found two small changes. The tape at the bottom edge had a clean cut in it, as if the edge of something smooth had pressed and slid, and the metal around the peephole showed a faint grey smear, a half-moon shape at its lower edge, like a brow. I rubbed it with my thumb. It did not come off. Work did not help. Words refused to hold meaning. My screen felt like a bright window with nothing behind it. I left early and walked a long loop around several blocks to reach home from a different direction. My hope was simple, to arrive at a time the habit did not expect. On my floor, the air felt thinner. The light seemed colder. My door's number looked a shade darker than the other numbers, as if the paint there had aged faster. I carried 2 bags of groceries I did not need. I moved past his door without stopping my feet. At my lock, I missed the keyhole once, then twice, and forced myself to breathe. Inside, I checked the apartment room by room. The window, the closet, the bathroom, the small space above the kitchen cabinets. It all looked the same. The chair pressed the door. The lamp glowed. The papers waited. I ate without taste and put the phone on record again. I wrote the date and time on a 6th page and drew a simple map of my floor from memory. Elevator, stairs, 4 doors on each side, mine at the end. I marked his door with a small X. I stared at the page until the lines blurred and steadied. The first sound that night came earlier, just after 9. Not taps, not a slide, a soft metal click from the hallway, like a keyring being turned over in a palm, then silence. I stood at the door for a long time, breathing in a slow pattern, feeling each breath change the shape of my ribs, and nothing else. At 9:37, the light under the door dimmed, as if someone stood over it. A small card slid into the gap, but did not pass through. It rested with its edge just visible. I reached for it and stopped. I put on gloves from under the sink with hands that shook. I pulled the card in and held it under the lamp. It was a cutout shape from thin cardboard, a keyhole again, but this time cut completely through so that the lamplight shone up through it onto my palm. The edges of the cut were very clean. The curve at the top had been done in one motion. I set it on the table and felt the small hairs on my forearm rise as if the air itself had hands. The next hour stretched so long that time lost edges. I counted in my head. I matched numbers to breaths. I kept my body still and my eyes open. At 10:42, the sensor light flickered again, twice in a slow blink. The chair creaked. The bottom gap darkened. No paper came. The dark moved away. The hum returned. I slept late, collapsed by weight rather than invited by calm. Morning showed a new mark on the wood just below the peephole, thin and short, like a notch. The kind of mark a small tool would leave if set down gently and lifted away. On the floor, just inside my door, lay a tiny sliver of wood, no longer than a grain of rice. I touched it with a fingertip. It stuck for a second from sweat and then fell. I moved the chair and opened the door with the chain still on. The hallway was empty. The light hummed. His door was closed. On the floor outside my door, near the edge of the frame, lay a thin white thread again, the exact kind I had seen on the first morning, as if the building had turned back to the start while I slept. I closed the door and pressed the chair back into place. I walked to the window and looked down at the street. The world outside moved in straight lines with clear reasons. People crossed. Cars turned. A bus stopped and opened its doors. I put my forehead to the glass and let its cold calm me for a moment. Then I made a new plan, a plan that felt like a line cut through soft material. I would leave the apartment for one night. I would take only what I needed. I would go to a small hotel 2 stations away, pay cash, and sleep in a room with no history. I would return in the morning and see if the marks had multiplied or reset. If they multiplied, I would call the landlord. If they reset, I would call a locksmith and change what could be changed. I packed a small bag. I took the drawings. I took the phone. I took a toothbrush and a shirt. I left the chair against the door and the lamp on low. I listened at the door for a long minute, then opened it and stepped into the hallway. The moment the door closed behind me, I smelled it, a faint, clean scent like new pencil shavings and laundry soap, not strong, not sweet, just present. It hung in the air, the way breath hangs in cold weather. The hallway floor looked normal. The elevator doors looked normal. The scent was the only new thing. It trailed toward the stairs. I chose the elevator anyway. When the doors opened, a thin white thread lay across the threshold, the length of a finger, placed at an angle like a compass needle. I stepped over it and pressed the button for the lobby. The doors closed, and in the small box of the elevator car, the clean scent became stronger, as if the metal walls held it like sound. When the doors opened again, the lobby looked empty and bright. The landlord's desk sat with no one behind it. The front door glass showed the grey afternoon and the thin trees across the street. I crossed the lobby, touched the metal bar, and stepped out into air that felt wider and less careful than the air upstairs. I did not turn back to look at the windows. I walked to the corner, turned left, and moved into the grid of the city where people do not notice one another unless they must. I told myself that distance was the only answer left. And for the first time since moving in, I believed it could be. I walked several blocks away from the building before the sense of being followed faded from the surface of my skin. The air outside felt wider, but not cleaner. The city noise should have drowned out my thoughts, but instead it sharpened them. Every reflection in every window felt like a second version of me, a shape out of sync with my steps. I reached the hotel, a small place with an empty lobby and soft carpet that muffled everything. I paid for one night, took the key, and went up to the room. Inside the hotel room, the walls felt generic, soft beige, flat art prints, neutral curtains. In theory, neutral should feel safe. Instead, it felt erased. I sat on the edge of the bed. I listened. No hum of the hallway, no precise stillness. The air carried no meaning. There was no pattern here. That emptiness should have relaxed me, and yet it didn't. It felt like floating. I set the drawings on the small desk. The circle, the keyhole, the door, the hallway, my door. I stared at them and waited for my heartbeat to settle into a normal rhythm. It didn't. My pulse beat slow, 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 like I was still in that apartment, counting breaths. Time passed in a strange way. I lay down with my shoes still on. I watched the shadows move across the ceiling as cars passed outside. Eventually sleep arrived, but it didn't feel like sleep. It felt suspended. No dreams, no images, just a sense of being paused. When morning came, the room looked exactly the same as the night before, but the drawings on the desk had shifted. Not much, only a few millimeters. The circle page had moved slightly off its original alignment. The keyhole page had slid forward by less than the width of a finger. The door page had rotated a few degrees clockwise. the way a compass needle might when settling. I stared at them for a long time, trying to convince myself I had done that before falling asleep. I could not remember touching them. I placed each page exactly back into alignment. I checked out of the room, left the key, and walked back toward my building. My body felt lighter and heavier at the same time, like I was returning to a place that already held the next part of the story, like a book left open on a table with the next page ready to turn whether I touched it or not. On my floor, the hallway light hummed with the same low note. The air felt thick again. His door looked unchanged. My door looked unchanged. That sameness carried more meaning now. Too perfect. Perfect meant curated. I unlocked the door and stepped inside with small, careful movements. Everything was exactly where I left it. The lamp, the chair against the door inside. The recording still running, but then I noticed a detail so small and so deliberate that it froze me where I stood. On my table, the 5 pages I had taken with me to the hotel lay in the exact same arrangement as before, and next to them lay a 6th page. Not mine, not printed, a new drawing. I stood very still, breathing shallow and slow. The 6th page showed the hotel room bed from above. The same bed I had slept in. The same pillow. The same plain blanket. Drawn with the same pencil pressure. The same heavy hand. There was no figure on the bed. But the bed existed on the page as if the one who drew it had been in the room, or in the walls, or in the space between the hour I arrived and the hour I left. I placed the page with the others. The apartment felt smaller. The ceiling felt lower. The silence inside the room changed temperature. The boundary between here and there no longer felt like a physical border. The apartment felt like a place inside a place. The hotel room felt like a place inside this place now. Every location connected. I sat down, slowly, because standing no longer felt right. The chair made a small sound beneath me, wood settling, air shifting. I realized that leaving had not interrupted anything. It had only proved something. Distance did not matter. Walls did not matter. Doors did not matter. He had not been marking my apartment. He had been marking me. I sat at the table without moving, staring at the 6 pages. The circle, the keyhole, the door, the hallway, my door, the hotel bed. They formed a path, not a sequence. A path that did not describe space. A path that described proximity. Every drawing narrowed in. Every page had moved a step closer to me. I understood then that the place did not matter anymore. The pattern had taken root. The apartment was quiet. The hallway outside was quiet. My body was quiet. The kind of quiet that is not silence, but compliance. The kind of quiet that accepts that it is being observed without demanding to understand how. Time passed without edges. Eventually I stood and walked to the door. The chair moved lightly, as if it knew the shift. I did not remove it. I simply placed my hand on the peephole, not covering it, not blocking it, but resting my fingers lightly on the metal. The metal felt warm, not from the lamp, not from my hand, but as if it had been held from the other side. I moved back to the table and sat again. My breathing slowed on its own. A moment later, I heard weight in the hallway. Not footsteps, not tapping, a presence, a pressure, a shape without sound. The sensor light blinked once. Then, nothing. The air thickened inside the apartment in a way that felt familiar now. Not suffocating, not threatening, just present. The hair on my arms did not rise this time. My body did not tense. I had crossed a line somewhere during the night in the hotel. The line where fear turns into recognition. The door vibrated once, gently. Not a knock, not a push, a breath. The wood moved as if a face leaned against it on the other side. I did not speak. There was no need. The space between the door and the room no longer required words. The bottom gap darkened. Something slid under. Not a page. Something smaller. I waited until the hallway pressure pulled back, slow and patient. When the air returned to its regular thickness, I bent down and picked up the object. It was a small metal washer, the size of a coin, smooth, cold, with a center hole, a perfect circle, the exact shape of the drawing from the first night, but real and heavy and specific. A simple object, but not random. This was a keyhole without a lock, a door without a handle, a symbol made into matter. I placed it on the table with the papers. Nothing moved for a long time after that. Hours became shapes with no meaning. I ate a little. I drank water. I laid down with the lamp still on. I slept, not because I was tired, but because sleep was the next step in the pattern. The apartment no longer felt like a place I lived in. It felt like a station inside a larger system, a place where the exchange was being completed. When morning arrived, the door was still locked, the chair was still in place, the papers were still in the same neat order, the washer sat exactly where I put it. I packed a small bag again and left the apartment without looking back. I did not rush, I did not check behind me, I did not try to catch reflections in the windows. I simply walked, out the door, down the hall, into the elevator, through the lobby, onto the street. Outside, the world looked the same, cars, people, routine, but there was a small knowledge settled deep inside me now, a quiet conviction, a certainty that I did not belong to those rhythms anymore. Because when something learns the shape of your presence, not your location, you stop being separate from it. Now, every hallway feels like it has a peephole placed somewhere just outside the corner of my sight. Every still moment carries that small pressure of being near something that does not need to announce itself. He does not need to knock again. He does not need to slide another page. He does not need to follow. He already arrived. He is part of me now. And I understand that the circle, the keyhole, the door, the hallway, the bed, none of them were warnings. They were introductions, a sequence of agreements, a pattern of enrollment. I do not need to return to that building. Wherever I am now, I am already being observed, from inside the pattern that I once believed was outside my life. I drove out to the campground on a Thursday afternoon because I wanted silence. The city had felt loud for weeks, not in a dramatic way, but in that slow way where every small sound feels connected to 1,000 other small sounds. I needed a place where time did not overlap itself like that. I needed a place away from schedules and phones and notifications. I needed the kind of quiet that feels like medicine. The place I chose was simple, a small loop road, a few campsites spread out along a narrow creek, tall pine trees with long dark needles that formed a roof even when the sky was open. The park map looked old and faded, like it had been photocopied too many times. It made the place feel forgotten, which felt perfect. When I arrived, the air smelled like sap and cold stone. There was a faint drizzle, nothing heavy, just the kind of rain that settles into clothing without making noise. The sky hung low, but not in a threatening way. It looked like a lid placed loosely over the world, holding everything inside and pressing it into calm. I parked near the creek and stepped out onto the pine-covered ground. The soil felt soft under my shoes. The trees were tall and straight, and the brown needles on the ground made a quiet carpet that softened every step. Somewhere far back in the forest, I heard a single tap of something hitting wood, maybe a bird or a branch, but it faded so quickly that it felt like it had never been there at all. I set up my tent without rush. The fabric smelled like old trips and dried rain. The poles clicked together in a rhythm that felt familiar and grounding. When I pulled the rain fly over the top, the drizzle picked up just slightly, as if the sky had been waiting for the tent to be finished. The sound of the water on the fabric was soft and steady, not chaotic. It made the air around me feel thicker, as if the whole forest was breathing through a single slow lung. I put my food in the car, zipped the tent, and sat on the small camping chair with a cup of water. The creek ran a few meters away with a calm and constant sound, like whispered static. The rain tapped gently on everything. The world felt muted. I could feel tension draining out of my muscles in slow waves. When the daylight finally faded, it did it fast. The sky darkened from gray to deep navy, and the trees turned into tall silhouettes, darker than the sky behind them. The forest felt older in the dark. Not larger, older. The kind of age that comes from time measured in roots and stones instead of clocks and years. I lay down on my sleeping pad and listened to the rain. The sound had a soothing rhythm that made every thought slow down. My breathing matched the rain without effort. I felt the first pull of sleep arrive in the back of my mind like a soft hand on the shoulder. When I woke again, it was still night. The rain had stopped. The air in the tent felt cooler, heavier, and less comfortable. The creek sound was still there, but it seemed lower and thin, as if it had moved farther away even though everything was in the same place as before. I could hear nothing else. No wind, no animals, no shifting branches. The silence was not empty, it was focused, as if the entire forest was holding still for a reason. I stayed on my back, breathing slowly. I stared at the roof of the tent. The fabric looked darker than before, almost black. The cold seemed to come not from the air itself, but from the stillness in it. Time in the tent felt stretched, like minutes were being pulled longer than normal. After a long while, I closed my eyes again. I let the silence settle around me, layer by layer. The quiet felt heavy on my chest, but not painful. More like a quiet pressure, telling my mind to not make sudden thoughts. I drifted back towards sleep. The next time I woke, I did not know how long had passed. The watch screen glowed faintly when I lifted my wrist. The forest outside was still silent. The air inside the tent felt warmer from my own breath, but also somehow tighter. The stillness outside felt strange now. No forest stays silent for that long. Even sleeping woods make sound. Even windless nights have insects and tiny movements of soil. Then I heard a soft sound outside. Not a large noise, not sudden. Just a slight shift of weight on damp ground. A slow adjustment, the kind a person makes when placing a foot carefully so that it will not disturb anything. Not an animal sound, not a branch, a deliberate human movement. I did not move. I kept my breathing slow. I kept my eyes open only partway, not wanting even my eyelids to make a sound. The world outside the thin fabric of the tent felt close, as if the forest had moved inward while I slept. The silence returned again after the shift, but it was a different silence now, not passive, not natural. It felt like something was waiting right outside, holding its stillness with intent. I stared at the tent roof and waited. The air inside the tent grew warmer around my face, while the space outside felt colder with each passing second. The quiet lasted so long that my mind tried to pretend I had imagined the sound. But even as I thought that, my body rejected the idea. The silence had weight. Weight only exists when something causes it. I remained completely still and waited for the next sound. The next sound came as a faint press against the fabric low to the ground, like a fingertip testing the curve of the tent near my feet. It did not push or slide. It held for a breath and released. The silence after felt larger, as if the whole forest had leaned in for that one small contact and then stepped back again. I kept my body still. The urge to sit up rose and fell in waves. Each time it passed, I felt a small relief, like I had avoided setting off some quiet alarm. The thin nylon between me and the outside felt both useless and sacred, like a line that meant nothing and everything at once. Time stretched. The air cooled another few degrees. When a thin breeze finally moved through the trees, the needles whispered once and were still again. I waited for more contact. None came. Sleep arrived in broken pieces, not restful, but enough to blur the edges of the night. Morning took shape as a slow gray, then a paler gray. The creek returned to its ordinary voice. A bird called once and stopped. The tent fabric turned from shadow to cloth. I unzipped the door and let the air in. It smelled like wet bark and stone. The ground outside showed nothing clear. Pine needles hid whatever stories the night might have left. I walked a small circle around the tent anyway. The soil near the back edge looked slightly pressed, not in a print, but in a different sheen, as if weight had rested there without moving. On the trunk of the leaning pine, a patch of damp bark held a fresher scratch, thin and vertical, no longer than a finger. It might have been there already. It might have appeared in the night. I could not tell. Coffee steadied my hands. Food put normal weight back into the morning. The forest settled into a rhythm that felt safe again. I cleaned up, packed the stove, and set out on the loop trail that traced the creek. My steps found the pace of the place. The rain began again, light and even. It filled the air with a soft curtain of sound that made distance feel farther than it was. The trail wound through pines and small clearings with wet grass. In one clearing, someone had arranged 3 stones in a narrow stack the height of a hand. The stones were clean on the top sides and dark on the bottom sides, as if they had been set recently. A small thread of red string lay half buried at the base of the stack. I touched it with a fingertip. It felt like the kind of string that comes on bakery boxes. It looked wrong here. I left the stones as I found them and walked on. The campground loop returned me to my site by late morning. A car had parked 2 sites down, but no tent stood there yet. A cooler sat under a tree, closed. The rest of the loop was empty. The rain thinned to a mist and stopped. The sky lightened. The forest felt like a room in a house after guests leave. All air and quiet and faint traces of movement. I ate, read a few pages, failed to remember them, and closed the book. The tent stood where it had before. The leaning pine watched without moving. The creek kept its steady voice. The scratch on the trunk looked the same. I told myself that the night happens to everyone in different ways, and that the mind bends simple facts into strange shapes in the dark. That thought helped for an hour. The afternoon dimmed early. The sky brought back a deep lid of clouds. The air cooled and carried the smell of far rain. I set my headlamp near the tent entrance, tested the batteries, and placed my shoes just inside. I tightened the small guy lines until the fabric looked smooth. I put my food in the car again and checked the doors twice. Simple steps, done slowly, can feel like a plan. Dusk fell like a long exhale. The trees turned into dark lines. The creek withdrew into the background of hearing. The air filled with the thick silence that comes before steady rain. I lay down and listened to it arrive. When the first drops met the fly, they came in careful rows, then in tighter rows, then in a single soft field of sound. The forest dimmed further inside that sound. My breathing matched it. Sleep came quickly this time, helped by the rain's even hand. I woke to stillness again. The rain had stopped. The tent air was warmer from my breath, cooler at the edges. The silence had the same held quality as the night before, a decision not to move rather than the absence of movement. I waited. The creek's voice seemed to sit behind a wall, unchanged but less present. The forest felt like it was listening. A soft brush ran along the tent wall near my shoulder height. Not a push, not a drag, the kind of contact a person makes with the back of a finger when tracing a line without wanting to leave a mark. It moved the width of my shoulder and stopped. The nylon flexed and returned. My skin cooled under the place it had passed, as if the air itself had been replaced there for a second. My body asked to sit up. I did not. I let my hands stay open and my breath stay slow. I counted heartbeats until the urge faded. The next touch came lower, near my hips, the same light test, the same immediate stillness after. A third touch came at my ankles, lighter still, only a suggestion, a ghost of pressure that might have been my own pulse reflected in the fabric if not for the pattern of the two before it. No voice came, no words, only a presence measuring a shape. The silence stretched. When the contact returned, it was at the zipper, a tiny click as the metal tab twitched from weight. It did not move further. The small sound happened once, twice, then stopped. The air in the tent felt like glass. I lay like that for a long time. Sleep did not come back. Dawn finally did, pulling the tent from black to gray again. The first bird called later than usual, or maybe my sense of time was wrong. I unzipped the door and let the morning in. The ground was patterned with scattered needles that looked freshly fallen. A few rested in short, straight lines, parallel to one another, as if placed by fingers rather than wind. A small shape hung from the low branch of a sapling opposite the tent door. It was a simple thing made of 2 sticks tied in a cross with a thin red string, the same color as the thread by the stone stack. The knot looked new. The sticks were the length of my hand. They hung still in the near windless air. I took it down and held it. The string was damp but not swollen. The sticks were clean of bark, as if they had been rubbed. The knot was a neat square, the kind a careful person ties out of habit. I set the shape on the picnic table and stared at it until the lines blurred. The forest felt both empty and occupied. A room after feet are washed from the floor, a bed after covers are smoothed. I walked the loop again mid-morning, this time slower. The stones in the clearing still stood, but a 4th stone lay next to the stack, flat and wet, as if waiting to be added. The red thread at the base had shifted. It now pointed toward the direction of my sight, like a small arrow. I told myself that rain moves light things. I told myself that small chants can arrange simple signs into patterns. The words did not connect. Back at camp, the car 2 sites down was gone. No tent had ever gone up. The cooler had left no mark. My own site looked unchanged, except for the small detail I noticed near the tent stake closest to the creek. The ground there was slightly cleaner, a thin oval where the usual mix of needles and grit had been brushed aside. No print, only absence. Late afternoon returned with another light rain. I sat under the fly, legs crossed, and listened to it. The sound put a calm cover over the day but could not erase the image of the sticks and the knot. I thought of the 3 touches along the tent wall, the test at the zipper, the pressed ground by the stake. The pattern formed a shape that looked like a person learning the outline of a container. Evening arrived and poured itself into the spaces between trees. I put the stick cross inside the car and locked the doors. I zipped the tent and laid out my light and shoes as before. I set my phone to record. The rain faded to mist and then to nothing. The night took its now familiar position around the campsite, attentive and patient. Sleep took longer to come. When it did, it came in a flat sheet and left just as flat. I woke to a feeling rather than a sound, the sensation of being watched from above rather than from beside. I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling of the tent. A darker oval marked the fabric overhead, not a shadow but a dampness, as if a wet leaf pressed there from the outside. It did not move. The tent did not sag. The oval held its shape like a print. A minute later, something tapped once on the fly from the top center, so light it could have been a drop that had waited all night to fall. The tap did not repeat. The oval remained. The silence thickened in the small space, like a second tent pitched inside the first. When morning came, the oval had dried to a faint shape. Outside, a small bundle rested at the base of the leaning pine. It was made of more of the same red string, wrapped tight around a handful of short needles, and a single lock of pale hair no longer than a finger. The hair did not look like mine. I stood very still in the grey light, and understood that the forest had not simply been near me these nights, it had been learning me, and now it wanted to show that it could keep a peace. The sky stayed low and heavy through the morning, without real daylight, only a pale wash that felt like the world had been erased to one single shade of grey. I walked slow circles around the site, to keep my body from locking into the same stillness the forest had already chosen. The creek sounded normal again, but the sound now felt like a mask placed over something deeper. I tried to detach from the bundle I had found, but my eyes kept returning to it. The red string was knotted in a pattern that suggested repetition, practice, familiarity. The hair bound inside looked brittle and clean, as if someone had cut it with intention and stored it dry and safe before placing it here. I eventually picked the bundle up with 2 fingers and placed it inside a small zip bag. I sealed the bag, closed my eyes, and counted to 5 before setting it in the trunk of the car. I did not want to leave it lying in the open. I did not want it near the tent either. My mind could not decide what counted as a safe place, so I chose a compartment. Compartment is still distance. I needed distance. After that, I walked the loop trail again, partly to see if anything new had appeared, and partly because I needed to move my legs. The clearing with the stone stack looked the same at first glance, but closer inspection told a different story. The 3 stacked stones were now 4. The extra stone that lay nearby the previous day had been placed on top. The red thread at the base pointed in the same direction as before, unchanged in angle, but now 2 strands instead of 1 sat there. The thread looked doubled, not replaced. On the opposite side of the clearing, I noticed a line in the soil where pine needles had been brushed aside in a thin single stroke. The line pointed back toward the loop road this time, not toward my sight. The line was straight. It looked deliberate. I crouched and examined the soil more closely. The thin trench of displaced needle cover could have been made by a walking stick or a finger. The thought of a finger made my shoulders tense. I stood again and considered hiking out early. I had the car. I had fuel. I had no true obligation to remain here for another night. Leaving would have been easy. But the part of my mind that observed instead of reacted told me something I could not dismiss. The pattern had been unfolding with patience, not aggression. The attention had been careful, not violent. Something was studying me, something that valued observation more than confrontation. Leaving now felt like closing a book halfway through the final chapter, not for safety, but out of fear of knowing what the shape would become once completed. The forest had already begun telling its story, and my presence inside the story meant the ending might not exist without me. I returned to the site before the rain returned. I boiled water and ate again, slower this time. The air thickened in the afternoon, heavy with humidity from the earlier rain and the promise of more. The leaning pine's trunk glistened at its scar. The tent fly dried in patches, then dampened again as new mist drifted in from nowhere. The forest prepared itself without sound. Evening erased the colors early. The edges of the trees blurred into the dark sky and merged until distance was indistinguishable. The creek blended into the rising night hum. I set the recording again. I placed the lantern lower this time. I lay down and let the rain come back. The rain felt less like weather now, and more like a ritual the air conducted to call something forward. Sleep came in small pieces again, more like dipping underwater than actually resting. At some point deeper in the night, I surfaced from one of those shallow drops of sleep and realized the rain had stopped again. The forest had fallen into its tight hold of silence. The tent fabric felt colder on the air side. The air smelled faintly of pine pitch and soil, more concentrated than before, as if pressed close to the tent walls. I did not hear footsteps this time. Instead, I felt vibration in the ground beneath my sleeping pad, a low, even pulse, like weight shifting through soil at a distance, not close enough to press the tent, but close enough to travel through earth. The pulse repeated with long pauses. The forest held its breath again. Then the pulse stopped completely. The silence after the pulse felt like the bottom of something, a pause before a reveal. A minute later, a tiny motion disturbed the tent overhead, not like a push, not like a press, but like an impression forming from moisture drawn inward through the fabric. A small shape darkened the nylon, the size of a thumbprint, but slightly longer, like a fingertip pressed from the outside. It appeared, stayed for a few seconds, then faded as if absorbed back into the night. It happened 3 times in 3 different places on the roof. 3 small shapes, 3 small impressions, 3 small marks. The shapes did not align with the taps from the night before. This was not a repeat. This was a new form of contact. The silence deepened. Sleep never returned. Morning finally arrived, pale and exhausted. My body felt drained, as if I had lain awake for weeks instead of hours. When I stepped outside, the ground near the tent stakes showed something new. 4 thin shapes made of pine needles had been arranged directly in front of the tent door. Each shape mirrored the small impression that had appeared overhead. 4 identical little symbols, almost like a signature. Inside the car trunk, the zip-sealed bag held the bundle just as I left it. But the bag itself had fogged on the inside, as if moisture had seeped in through the plastic, even though the seal was intact. The pale hair inside had curled slightly, like it had reacted to the night. The forest did not feel like something I had visited anymore. It felt like something I had been admitted into. The day felt unreal, like I was walking inside a memory rather than inside my own lived moment. Every movement felt delayed, as if the forest reacted before I did. The world around me looked the same as before, but I could no longer look at any detail without wondering if it contained a signal meant for me. The creek ran, the trees stood still, the sky sat heavy, but none of it felt neutral. Every small part felt curated. I ate slowly, barely tasting anything. My body only moved because habit told it to move. I sat on the camping chair and watched the space between the leaning pine and the tent door, the distance where things had appeared or passed or left traces I could not fully interpret. Nothing happened in that time, but I did not feel alone. The absence of movement felt like a considered choice. Mid-afternoon brought another brief rain, the kind that falls in thin vertical lines, not pushed by wind, not spread by drift, just dropped as if measured. The rain lasted less than 10 minutes. When it ended, the forest air felt sharper, more defined. I stood and walked the loop again, because moving my legs felt like the only defensible act left. The stone stack was still there, now taller again. 5 stones instead of 4. The pattern grew in the same slow pace as everything else. The red string at the base had twisted upon itself in a coil, not tied, not straight, but curled like something had rotated slightly in the night and dragged the thread with it. 3 small pine cones sat near the base now, placed in a perfect line, equal distance apart, pointing toward the loop road. When I returned to my sight, the cloud cover had lowered again. The tent looked smaller than it had before, not physically, but in scale against the trees, as if the world around it had grown. I sat near the trunk of the leaning pine and stared at the scar in the bark. A small bead of resin hung there, fresh and amber bright. I had not noticed it before. Resin does not appear instantly. It suggests something recent. Late afternoon moved into twilight without a real boundary between the two. The forest darkened from inside out, rather than from the sky downward. The air became heavier near the ground. I prepared for night again, each action slower, more deliberate. I set the recorder. I placed my shoes. I checked the fly and zippers. I breathed deeply several times before lying down. Sleep came in fragments again, but each fragment seemed darker than the one before, not in color, but in the feeling behind it. When I woke again, it was not because of sound, it was because of pressure. The ground beneath me vibrated in a low, even rhythm. Not like footsteps, not like shifting weight, but like a slow pulsing from somewhere deep. I placed my palm flat against the tent floor. The soil beneath the padding carried the rhythm like a heartbeat from something under the forest, something without bone or fur or breath, something older than the pines. The rhythm stopped, returned once, and then stopped again. The silence that followed was total. Even my breathing felt stolen from the world rather than produced by it. I lay still with my eyes open, staring at the dark tent roof. My heart slowed itself without permission. The air in the tent seemed to take on a new thickness, like the inside of the space had been replaced with something heavier. I did not know how long that moment lasted. Then I noticed the shape. It appeared slowly, just above the zipper line, a faint curve forming on the fabric from outside. The curve darkened with moisture first, then deepened in contour, as if something was pressing gently. The curve extended into a longer stroke, forming a shape almost like a hook or a backward letter. It did not scrape or drag. It simply formed and rested there, as if someone placed it perfectly and then held it still. The shape stayed long enough that I knew it was not imagination. The nylon depressed slightly. The coolness of the impression radiated through the fabric into the air around it. The curve did not move. The pressure did not increase. It only existed and waited. After several seconds, the curve faded. The fabric returned to normal. Nothing else followed it. No second shape, no third, only one, a single mark. The stillness afterward felt even more final than the mark itself. When dawn finally came, it came slowly, like light did not want to cross into this small piece of world. The tent walls shifted from charcoal to gray. The creek returned to normal sound. A wind passed for the first time in days. The forest exhaled. I stepped outside into the morning and saw a new sign near the base of the leaning pine. Not a bundle, not a stack, not a thread. A wide, shallow mark in the needle carpet, the size of a circle drawn with one continuous sweep of a hand. The pine needles inside the circle lay pressed flat. The needles outside remained undisturbed. The circle pointed toward the tent, not the road. I walked slowly back toward the site entrance and noticed something farther down the loop road. Another circle, same size, same shape, same direction. A third circle lay near the bend of the road. A fourth circle sat near the place where the 3 stones had first been. A line of circles, equal in size and spacing, leading deeper into the trees, one after another. A path waiting to be followed. I stood there for a long time, looking at the circles. The forest had arranged distance into direction, nothing random, nothing careless, everything placed with attention. The circles were not drawings. They were depressions in the needles, made with weight or pressure, or something that behaved like contact. The spacing between them was consistent. The circles formed a trail that did not follow the loop road and did not follow the creek. The path cut inward into the darker part of the pines, into the section of forest that the map showed only as blank space with no printed trail lines at all. I followed the first circle slowly, not stepping inside it, but stepping around it. The second circle lay 10 paces deeper. The third waited another 10 paces beyond that. The spacing held steady. The forest canopy grew denser as I moved. The air grew heavier. The quiet deepened until the sound of the creek behind me felt like it belonged to another place entirely. I kept walking, counting the circles as they appeared. 10 circles, then 12, then 16. They led me into a part of the forest where the pine carpet thickened and the air smelled older, like resin and earth that had been sealed from light. I stopped walking when I reached a small clearing with a narrow patch of ground that was bare of needles. The soil there looked darker, almost black. No circles marked this spot. Instead, the entire patch of ground looked pressed, as if something had stood there, or lain there, or simply existed there for long enough to make the earth change color. I looked down at that dark ground. The shape was not distinct. It was not a footprint. It was not an outline. It was a space. It felt like a place where a body might have rested, or been placed, or had chosen to remain. I could not tell how long I stood there. The forest did not change while I did. The air did not move. The trees did not sway. The silence grew so complete that I could hear my pulse in my ears. For a moment, the silence seemed to push back, as if something out there was listening to me as intently as I was listening to it. Then I turned and walked back toward the circles. They were still there, unchanged, marking a path in reverse now, leading out instead of in. I counted them backward, 16 back to 12, 12 back to 8, 8 back to 4, 4 back to 2. The air gradually loosened again. The creek sound returned, but weakly, like it had to fight to regain position in the world. When I reached the campsite, I felt a faint relief at the sight of the tent, the car, the leaning pine. Familiar objects looked like anchors. The next hours of daylight passed in fragments. I drank water. I ate a small snack with no hunger. My body moved out of routine rather than choice. I took the small bag from the trunk and held it in my hand. The red string inside the bag seemed darker. The hair remained coiled, but the coil felt tighter, as if the shape had compressed slightly overnight. I placed the bag on the picnic table and stared at it until the light changed from afternoon to early evening. The forest's silence returned in anticipation before true dark arrived. I prepared the tent again. I set the recorder again. I lay down again. The pattern held its shape. The night settled. Sleep did not arrive fully this time. I hovered under it but remained aware. At some point, the ground began its low vibration again. The pulse rose from the soil slowly, not like before, but more rhythmic, more definite. The pulse continued for a long time. The tent walls felt colder as the pulse strengthened. The silence around it became deeper, absorbing everything but that slow thrum. The pulse stopped in an instant. Then, very slowly, the tent fabric overhead began to darken in a shape larger than before. The mark grew into a long oval, wider than a hand, positioned directly above where my head lay on the pad. The shape did not move. The shape simply existed. The nylon sagged inward by a few millimeters, no more, but enough to prove contact. It held there as if a presence was leaning down, aligning itself with the shape of my skull beneath. The room of the tent felt smaller than ever. The air felt pressed flat. The silence felt absolute. No sound entered, no sound left. The forest had completed its observation. The oval held for a long moment, then lifted, slowly, gradually, until the fabric returned to its original tension. The air remained heavy. The silence remained complete, as if a verdict had been made without words. I did not move. I stayed still until the faintest tone of gray pushed into the tent walls, signaling morning. When I stepped outside, the day greeted me without sound. The forest looked untouched. The tent looked ordinary. The car waited exactly where I left it. But there was one new thing. On the picnic table, directly where the zip bag had been placed, there now lay a small patch of pale pine resin, shaped in a thin oval. The bag itself sat beside it, sealed, untouched. The resin oval was not liquid. It had hardened. It had formed its shape while I slept. I picked up the bag and placed it back in the trunk. I left the resin on the table. I walked to the center of the site and looked at the looping path of the forest. Nothing moved. I broke camp in silence. I folded the tent carefully. I loaded the car. I checked the site 3 times with deliberate motion to make sure I had left no trace. As I drove out of the loop road, the forest receded behind me in the mirror, unchanged and unbothered. But I understood fully, even before reaching the highway, that the forest had not been trying to harm me. It had been showing me how to be part of its shape. And now, after leaving it, I would always remain that shape, whether I returned or not. When I got back home, the silence of my apartment felt wrong in a different way than the silence in the forest. This silence felt empty. The forest silence had never been empty. The forest silence had been structured. It had weight. It had purpose. This was just absence. I put my bags down and stood in the center of the living room, waiting for something in my body to normalize. It didn't. Everything felt slightly delayed, like I was still a few seconds behind real time. I turned on the lamp. I opened a window. I sat on the bed without meaning to sit. Every action felt rehearsed. When I finally lay down to rest, sleep did not come. The sense of being watched did not return. Nothing moved around me. The room did not shift. The air did not pulse. But I felt a strange pressure in my head, not like a headache, but like a memory pressing from the inside. I closed my eyes. Everything in the forest replayed, not as images, but as sensations. The pressure on the tent wall, the dry smell of resin, the small depressions in the pine needles, the ground pulse, the circles that led inward, the oval shape on the fabric above my head. The idea returned that I had not been in danger. I had been included. The forest had not tried to push me away. It had tried to root me into its pattern. At dawn, I rose and looked into the bathroom mirror. My face looked a little different, but not in a physical way. There was a calm in my eyes that felt borrowed from somewhere else. A calm that did not belong to a city life. I brushed my teeth slowly, watching my reflection with a strange detachment. The first day back passed in fragments. I tried to do normal things, grocery store, laundry, checking emails, but everything had a slight echo around it, as if nothing in the human world had full density anymore. I slept early. I woke often. No dreams, just blankness. On the second day, a faint, familiar smell entered the apartment. Not strong, not invasive, just faint, resin and wet pine. I did not panic. I did not move fast. I stood in the doorway of the bedroom and breathed quietly. The scent came from near the window. When I approached it, it faded. When I stepped back, it returned. I kept every movement measured. By nightfall, the smell had settled lightly in the center of the room. I sat on the edge of the bed with my hands on my lap and listened to the ordinary sounds of the building: pipes, elevators, cars below the street windows. None of those sounds masked the faint forest smell. It layered over everything like a thin tone in a piece of music. I slept again and again woke before dawn. On the third morning, I stepped barefoot into the living room and felt something under my foot. Not sharp, not painful, just small. I lifted my foot and saw a single pale pine needle on the floor. Clean, dry, perfectly intact, lying in a slight curve, like it had fallen naturally, but it had not. There had been no pine trees near where I parked, no pine trees near the building at all. And the needle was alone. I picked it up and held it between my thumb and index finger. It felt weightless. I could not stop noticing small things after that. The way a hair on my sleeve curled slightly in the same direction as the hair in the bundle. The way the silence in the hallway outside my apartment door held, sometimes for a second too long. The way certain hours of the night felt structured, not empty. As if some part of the forest had followed me back. Not as a creature, not as a presence, but as a pattern. During the fourth night, I woke for no reason at all, fully alert, eyes open, heart calm. There was no sound, no smell, no movement, only the sense of something aligned with me, and not outside me anymore. The sensation was not like being watched, it was like being mirrored. I lay still until sunrise, and felt that I was neither waiting nor being waited for. When morning arrived, light moving through the blinds looked slightly diffused, like light through mist. I knew then that nothing from the forest had ever been trying to scare me. The forest was showing me that I belonged to it too. I had left physically, yes, but I had not returned all the way. Parts of me remained under the pines, and parts of there were here now. I do not need to go back to the forest. It comes to me in small pieces, in thin scents, in patterns inside silence, in tiny touches of meaning most people never notice. I no longer think of the forest as a place. I think of it as a shape that found me, and is still unfolding through me slowly, one circle at a time. I rented the house because it seemed like the right mix of cheap and quiet. Not an apartment, not a hotel. A small detached place near the edge of town, where the streets became thinner and the lawns had more brown patches than green. The listing photos showed simple furniture and large windows. The owner's messages were short. The neighborhood reviews said nothing dramatic. It felt safe in a simple, forgettable way. When I arrived, the driveway was narrow and the house sat slightly off-center, like it had been placed too close to the right property line decades ago. The siding looked faded in a kind way, not neglected, just old. The curtains were drawn halfway. There was a porch light, but it didn't turn on when I tried the switch. I let it go. Small details did not matter yet. Inside, the air smelled faintly like old books that had been kept closed too long. Not damp, not mildewed, just unused. The living room furniture matched the photos exactly: plain couch, low table, floor lamp with a yellow shade. The house had that stillness of a place that hadn't been lived in for a while. The walls seemed to breathe in slow motion. I set my bag near the couch and walked through the rooms one by one. Bedroom, bathroom, kitchen with cheap white cabinets, a narrow hallway with a closet. Everything felt still. The windows faced other yards, not streets. The whole house sat slightly crooked on its foundation. My weight on the floorboards made small, honest sounds. That first hour, nothing felt wrong. I opened the windows to let in new air. The curtains moved slightly in a light breeze. I sat on the couch with the overhead light off, letting the evening dim naturally. The house seemed to approve of that. When night fully arrived, I closed everything and turned on the lamp in the living room. The room glowed warm and small. The walls almost vanished into the shade of the light. I lay on the couch with a blanket and scrolled without really reading. Sleep came slowly but comfortably, like a wave that washed the floor smooth. When I woke, it was still night. The lamp was still on, the same soft yellow, but the air felt different, not colder, not heavier, just different. The hairs on my arm did not rise. There was no sound, no motion, only a shift in the sense of space, as if the air volume inside the house had changed by a small percent. I sat up on the couch and looked at the doorway to the kitchen. The doorway looked slightly bigger, in a strange optical way, like the frame had pulled apart by an invisible millimeter. The darkness inside the kitchen looked darker than a normal unlit room. It looked layered, like something in there had depth. I stayed still until I felt the sense of space settle again. Eventually I lay down, and sleep returned in short bursts until morning arrived. In daylight, the shift made no sense. The kitchen looked normal, the doorway looked normal. I ate simple breakfast and sat outside for an hour. The neighborhood was silent and slow. Someone walked a dog at a distance. A garbage truck moved on a different street. Nothing in the world looked strange at all. By afternoon, I felt comfortable again. The air in the house seemed familiar. I read, I stretched, I took a short walk. When evening returned, the stillness of the house felt almost comforting again. I left a few lights off on purpose. The dark corners of the house seemed easier to accept when they were not brightened into contrast. When night arrived again, I slept in the bedroom instead of the couch. The bed frame creaked honestly under my weight. The mattress was thin but acceptable. I left the bedroom door open and used the light from the hallway instead of a lamp. The house felt quiet in a way that was not threatening, just old. I woke once more in the middle of the night, and again, the air felt different. This time, it was not a shift in volume. It was a shift in arrangement. My eyes opened and recognized immediately that something in the hallway light pattern had changed. The shape of the shadows on the floor no longer matched the objects that made them. The lamp in the living room cast light, but the shadow of the living room doorway on the hallway floor had moved several inches to the left. Not gradually, instantly, as if the house had been rotated by a fraction without moving the objects themselves. I sat up with the blanket around my legs and watched the floor. The shadows did not move again. The air did not change pressure. The silence held. There was no fear, only recognition. Not that I was alone, but that the house had not been empty before I arrived. It had simply been waiting for its shape to be seen again. Morning erased the strangeness again. The house looked mild and ordinary. The shadow on the hallway floor matched the doorway as if the night had been a mistake I had told myself. I made coffee slowly and drank it standing at the kitchen sink. The tap stuttered once and cleared. Sunlight landed on the cheap white cabinets and made them look cleaner than they were. I stood there longer than the coffee required, waiting for something in me to return to regular shape. It did not, but it settled. I walked the rooms and tried to memorize small details. The couch had a faint tear in the back corner where fabric met frame. The bedroom baseboard on the far wall had two short dents like old chair legs had tapped there. The living room lampshade had a darker oval on one side where someone's hand had handled it often in the same place. I touched the oval without meaning to and felt the simple fact of other people's habits slip through my fingers like dust. By noon, I felt comfortable enough to explore the yard. The back door stuck at the bottom but yielded to soft pressure. The yard was a thin rectangle with a crooked fence, dry grass, one narrow tree that had grown too close to the line, a concrete slab where a shed must have sat years ago. The slab held faint rust outlines where metal feet had once been. On the fence, a single hook remained, the kind that holds a small gate latch, but there was no latch and no gate. The absence looked tidy, purposeful, like a habit had been removed and the house had agreed to forget it. I sat on the steps and let the day move around me. The neighborhood had the rhythm of people who repeat the same tasks at the same hours. Engines started, engines stopped. A leaf blower passed far away and left the air empty again. I felt calm in a way that was not rest. It was more like alignment with a slow metronome. In the late afternoon, I went back inside and stood in the hallway again, looking at the spot on the floor where the shadow had drifted in the night. The wood had a slight dullness there, as if more feet had paused in that exact rectangle than in any other part of the hall. I placed my foot next to the dull patch. My heel fit along its edge too neatly. I took it away and decided not to repeat that test again. I cooked something simple and sat at the table with the window open a few inches. The evening moved in with a soft gradient. The house accepted the change without comment. The corners dimmed. The flat art on the walls lost color. The yellow lamp in the living room reclaimed the room with its small circle of warmth. I left the bedroom door open again when I lay down. When I woke that night, I knew instantly that the house had rearranged me instead of itself. Nothing in the room looked different. The door, the light, the blanket across my legs, the chair in the corner, the small stack of folded clothes on the dresser, everything matched the last image my eyes must have made before sleep. But my body lay at a different angle on the mattress, as if I had rotated in sleep to face a corner I hadn't faced in years. My head was near the same pillow, my feet near the same end, but the line of my spine pointed at the door in a way that felt chosen, not accidental. I held still until the sudden understanding passed. The house was not moving objects, it was moving relations, angles, lines, sight paths, a small shift in how things addressed one another. I closed my eyes and waited for my breath to grow even again. The night did not fill with sound. It did not offer a proof. It offered that quiet, careful pressure of attention I had felt the first night. Not from a person, from the interior of the space itself. I woke again just before dawn. The bedroom had the grey-blue of early light. I stood and checked the hallway floor. The shadow lay in the expected place. The air felt clean and unarguable. I walked to the living room and noticed the lampshade's darker oval again. It seemed slightly higher on the shade than the day before, though I could not measure it. I turned the lamp off, then on, and watched nothing happen in particular. The day was cooler. The house held temperature in a slow way. The thermostat on the wall was the old slide kind with no numbers, only a short line that could be nudged left or right. The line sat in the middle, a neutral position that felt like a decision someone else had made years before and the house continued to honor. I left it there and put on a sweater. I opened the hall closet and found a stack of folded sheets, a vacuum that did not work, a plastic bin with extra light bulbs, 2 coat hangers, and on the floor a small rectangle of carpet that did not match the rest. When I lifted the edge, I found plain plywood under it and a circle of paler wood at the center, where something circular had once rested a long time. I put the carpet piece back and closed the door gently. In the afternoon, I went for a longer walk and circled the block. From the street, the house looked shorter than from the inside, as if the roof pressed down harder than the rooms let on. The curtains in the living room sat at the exact halfway point. I stopped on the sidewalk and looked at them and had the simple, calm thought that the house liked that distance between open and closed. It liked the middle. Evening arrived. I washed the dishes so slowly it felt like a ritual. I put the towel back on the bar exactly straight. I aligned the chair legs under the table. I left the bedroom door half open, not fully, not nearly closed. I placed the lamp cord in a soft curve instead of a sharp angle. None of it was fear. I wanted to see what the house would do when I agreed with it. Night came soft. I lay down again with the hallway light making a clean line across the floorboards. I fell asleep from the sense that both of us were cooperating. When the shift arrived, it did not wake me with a sound or a movement. It arrived as absence. The house removed something I had grown used to in the last 2 nights, the faint sense of being measured. The attention withdrew without leaving. The result was a new kind of stillness, one that felt like the pause before a simple truth. I opened my eyes and saw the truth. The living room lamp was off. I had left it on. The hallway light was on. I had left it on. The 2 lights now made a different set of shadows. The doorway shadow lay centered, perfect. The dull patch on the floor held the shadow like a lid holds steam. Nothing else had changed. The air had the same temperature. The blinds cast the same faint lines, but the room had a new balance. The kind of balance you get when one element is subtracted so the rest can align. I sat up and waited for my heart to find a reason to race. It did not. My body accepted the change, like a corrected note in a piece of music. I stood and walked to the living room. The lamp switch clicked under my fingers. The bulb stayed dark. I tried another bulb from the closet bin. Dark. I left the lamp as it was and returned to bed. The second truth arrived near dawn. It arrived so gently that I only understood it after I had already seen it. On the dresser where I had left a small pile of folded clothes, the order of the stack had changed. The shirt that had been on top now sat under the sweater. The sweater that had been under now sat on top. The fold lines matched mine exactly. The edges were neat. The stack had not been disturbed. It had been edited. I stood in the doorway of the bedroom and looked at the stack for a minute without moving. A simple reversal, a small change in sequence, a tidy agreement that said, "This is better." I made breakfast and ate it quietly. The house felt satisfied in a way that had nothing to do with me. It felt like a person after a long to-do list, sitting for a minute before deciding what to do next. I washed the plate. I dried the plate. I put the plate back exactly where it had been. By late morning, the air in the hallway cooled. A draft moved from the kitchen toward the bedroom. It did not come from a window. It came from the thin gap at the baseboard where 2 sections of wall met. It smelled like paper that had been stored in a box in a dry closet. I crouched and placed my palm near the gap. The draft brushed my skin like a small exhale. The house had not hidden anything from me. It had been waiting for me to notice where it kept its breath. I returned to the living room and sat on the couch with my hands open on my knees. The lamp remained dark. The curtains hung halfway. The room had no tension. The day had no urgency. I let my eyes close and counted to 20. When I opened them, the flat art on the wall over the couch hung at a slightly new angle, not crooked, corrected. A precisely tiny rotation that brought its bottom edge parallel to the line of the couch, in a way it had not been the day I arrived. The house had finished tuning the room. I understood then that night would not bring a threat. Night would bring access. And somewhere in the interior shape of the house, a door that looked like a wall would stop pretending to be one. I waited for dusk as if the light itself were a key. The house cooled by small degrees and the rooms thinned into their night shapes. The halfway curtains made the windows into two quiet mirrors. I moved softly through the rooms, not to sneak, but to match the pace the house preferred. I checked the closet again. The little rectangle of wrong carpet still lay like a lid. The air along the baseboard gap kept its slow, paper-scented drift. I brought a flashlight and a butter knife from the kitchen and knelt. The knife slid under the carpet square with almost no resistance. The fabric lifted with a dry whisper. Under it, the pale circle in the plywood waited, the same soft ghost of a shape I had seen before. My hand hesitated above it without touching. The circle was not cut through. It was only outlined by difference in color, as if a round weight had rested there for years and then been carried away. The flashlight beam moved over the plywood and found 4 small countersunk screws at the circle's edges, filled flush with wood dust. I placed the knife tip in one and twisted. The dust crumbled and lifted. The screw head revealed itself, as if it had been expecting that small rotation. One by one they loosened, steady and patient, like hinges remembering a rhythm. When the last screw came free, the circle still did not move. I slid my fingers along its edge and felt the line where ply met ply. The wood was warm from the day. The circle no longer felt like a picture of a thing. It felt like a thing. I lifted gently. The panel rose a centimeter, then 2. A smell moved up through the gap. Dry paper, old soap, the inside of a wooden drawer. Not rot, not damp, a stored air. The flashlight reached into the dark and made a small white coin of light that found the top of a narrow cavity. The cavity was not deep, maybe the height of 2 handspans. A tight box in the floor between joists, neither crawl space nor basement, an interior pocket. Inside lay a stack of items wrapped in newsprint. The paper had yellowed into a quiet tan. I set the panel aside and lifted the top bundle. The wrapping flaked at a corner and revealed the edge of a book with a cloth spine. Under the book, a small tin sat with a pressed lid. Beside the tin, a folded length of curtain cord coiled neatly, like a sentence at the end of a paragraph. I carried the stack to the bedroom and set it on the bed. The house did not change temperature. The air did not thicken or lift. I unwrapped the book first. The cloth spine had no title left on it, only the faint embossed trace of letters that had once gleamed. The pages inside were blank, not empty from lack of printing, removed. Every page had been sliced close to the spine with a practiced hand, leaving a sheaf of thin ghosts glued to the binding. What remained was the shape of a book without the book itself. The tin opened with a soft, dry click. Inside lay a collection of small hardware that had no single purpose. 3 flat washers, 2 short screws, a hinge pin without its hinge, a bead of amber resin, hard as glass, a paper tag with a hole, the string long gone. The tag had a single pencil mark on it, a straight line angled slightly upward, neither letter nor number. A measure. I replaced each piece as carefully as I had lifted it and closed the tin. Under it, a second bundle lay thicker, wrapped around something round. The paper peeled back in a strip and released another smell, faint and electrified, like the air near a turned page in a hot attic. Inside was a small round mirror in a metal frame, tarnished at the edges, the glass cloudy. My face appeared in it as a dim oval, more suggestion than reflection. I turned it in the light. A film thinned and thickened across the surface, like breath that did not belong to me. I set the mirror aside and looked back into the cavity. A thin wooden channel ran away from the box along the joist. Not a pipe, not a wire path. A conduit made of wood, clean-edged, the width of 2 fingers, covered by slats that could slide aside if asked with the right pressure. The channel disappeared under the wall that separated the closet from the hallway. I replaced the items one by one, leaving the mirror for last. The mirror seemed like the only thing that had no obvious function in the house's language of alignment and sequence. It was not hardware. It was not cord. It was not resin. It was an eye that chose not to see, or that saw too much, and kept it. I placed the mirror back in its paper and returned the bundles to the cavity. I lowered the panel into place. The fit was exact. The screws turned home with the same quiet patience with which they had come out. I smoothed the carpet rectangle. The draft along the baseboard slowed until it felt like a resting breath. Night had deepened while I worked. The house held its shape around me with that exact half-closed attention I had begun to trust. I turned off the flashlight and stood in the hallway with my palms open, letting the dark find my outline and keep it. I slept on the couch that night, not to be closer to the closet, but to give the bedroom back to the house. The living room lamp remained dead, but the hallway light drew its line across the floor with more confidence than before, as if the rooms had agreed on their angles. I closed my eyes and felt the interior quiet gather itself into a single point, not pressure, presence. Sometime after midnight, the wakefulness that had learned to hear the house returned. I opened my eyes into the same still room. The couch fabric warmed under my shoulder. The ceiling held its flat planes. The air had that slight paper scent again, but this time it came from the center of the room, not the walls. I sat up slowly. The flat art above the couch no longer hung on its nail. It lay on the low table, face down, resting on the folded blanket I had used the first night. Beneath the place where it had hung, the wall was not damaged. There was no fresh mark, no fallen nail, no disturbance. Only a faint oval of cleaner paint, the exact size of the frame, an honest halo left by years of dust. The house had removed the picture without stress and placed it gently on a soft surface, as if to protect both frame and table. Behind the place where the picture had been, the wall was not a wall. A rectangle the same width and height as the frame sat there, flush with the plaster, edged with a seam as thin as the seam around the closet panel. The seam ran neat and certain along all four sides. The rectangle was not wood, it was not metal, it was a painted surface identical to the rest of the wall, except for the fact that it was a door pretending to be a wall and that it had stopped pretending. I did not touch it yet. The house had moved the picture without asking me to act. My part was to see, not to hurry. I sat with my hands on my knees and let the night adjust around the revelation. The quiet became heavier and then lighter, like a breath out after a held note. When I finally stood, it was with the slow care of someone stepping into a photograph. The seam under my fingertips was cool and almost featureless. The rectangle had no knob, no hinge shadow, only a slight give along its right edge, the kind you feel when a cabinet catches on paint and then remembers it is a door. I pressed there and felt the most delicate movement, as if the interior of the house leaned forward to meet my hand. I stopped. I rested my palm flat against the panel. The house did the same on the other side. The moment had nothing of triumph in it, and nothing of fear. It was agreement, an aligned line between two shapes that had been circling each other since I first lay on the couch under the yellow lamp. I stepped back. I left the panel closed. I lay down again and watched the rectangle in the wall until sleep came. Morning arrived pale and exact. The panel remained where it was. The picture remained on the folded blanket. The house felt unburdened, as if showing me the seam had been the task that had kept it awake. I ate without tasting and cleaned without thinking, keeping the rooms ordered, not to impose control, but to preserve the alignment we had reached. Then I stood once more before the rectangle and placed my hand where it had given. The house waited. It had offered access. The next movement would be mine. I pressed again, not to open it, not to force anything, only to confirm the boundary. The panel flexed the smallest amount against the pressure of my palm, like a hinge elsewhere was balancing its own memory. I did not open it. Opening didn't feel like the next step. Seeing that this was a door had been enough for that night. The house had made the reveal. The house set the pace. It would be wrong to rush into the space behind that panel the same night it was shown to me. So I stepped away. The picture frame still rested face down on the folded blanket. I knelt beside it, not to restore it, not to hang it back, but to study the back of the frame itself. The paper backing was intact. The small nails that held it in place had no fresh scratches. The wire hanger had no stress bend. The frame had been removed by someone who did not use force. Someone who knew how to separate two surfaces that did not want to be separated. I returned the frame to the table exactly as the house had placed it. The rest of that night passed in fragments. I slept for short intervals on the couch, always waking to the same still room, the same seam in the wall, the same soft, balanced air. The house made no more corrections. It waited. I lay there and matched its stillness. My mind was silent in the same way the rooms were silent. Balance had been reached but not completed. At dawn, I stood and looked again at the panel. Its edges were clean. The rectangle was as plain as any wall surface in the house, except for the fact that it existed. I left the house to get breakfast. Outside, the neighborhood looked unchanged. The air lacked the house's inner gravity. In the cafe, the register beeped. Chairs scraped. People formed lines. The noise felt clumsy. People moved like they didn't know they had shape. No one had alignment. I returned to the rental before noon. The porch step creaked in the same pattern as before. The smell inside was faint pine, faint paper, faint nothingness. I noticed immediately that one new detail had shifted. The lamp that had been dead was now lit again. Its yellow glow returned like a pulse that had been paused for exactly the right number of hours. The house had turned the light on for me not to surprise, but to specify. The couch sat exactly where it had been. The picture remained on the table. The bedroom felt untouched. All adjustments had been made. The next step was clearly meant to be mine. I walked to the panel and sat on the floor in front of it. The seam looked almost invisible in the daytime, but the interruption in the wall's continuous plane remained. If someone had painted over this panel thousands of times, the paint had never sealed its identity. It still remembered what it was. My hand reached forward again, and I rested my fingertips against the right edge, the side that had given slightly in the night. I pressed more firmly this time, not enough to force, not enough to pry, just enough to let the door acknowledge my intention. It responded with a tiny release, the soundless shift of a mechanism that had not been used in years. I removed my hand and stood up. The house did not expect me to open it in that exact second. It expected me to understand that access had been granted. That was enough. I made tea. I sat at the table facing the panel. The lamp's yellow circle of light held the room in a still shape. The open curve of the curtain and the half-shadowed window gave me the feeling of a boundary held open by invisible hands. Every object in the room waited in an exact pose. I slept that night again on the couch, not deeply, not anxiously, just present. Before dawn, I opened my eyes into the same steady room. Nothing had shifted. The picture remained on the blanket. The lamp glowed. The seam in the wall existed with a clear, steady definition. Only one new detail had appeared. On the low table next to the picture frame, a small piece of painter's tape rested flat. Not old tape, not brittle, new tape with clean edges and no dust. I picked it up and turned it over. It had nothing written on it. But someone had cut it into a very specific shape. A tiny arrow, pointing upward, pointing at the panel. This was the house giving me permission and instruction to proceed. The final step would have to be done on my terms, but inside its shape, I placed the piece of tape on my fingertip and sat again in front of the rectangle. There was no fear, only completion. Here was the quiet fact I understood down to my bones. I had not rented this house. This house had selected me. And now, after showing me where its interior opened, all that remained was to open it. I pressed. Not with force, with agreement. The panel accepted the pressure like a held breath finally released. It didn't swing, it didn't fall. It simply shifted inward just enough for the seam to widen the smallest fraction and reveal a darkness that wasn't the absence of light, but the presence of another interior. It opened exactly as much as it needed to. Nothing in the room resisted. Nothing in me resisted. The house had tuned every angle and object to reach this moment. Now all it needed was my entry. I placed both hands on the edge and leaned forward. The panel moved without a sound. Behind it lay a space no bigger than a tall wardrobe. Not a room, not a crawl. A vertical shaft of shadow, lined with smooth planes of wood that looked untouched by paint or nail or history. The interior looked clean, like a drawer that had never stored anything. At the bottom, a small object rested on its side. Not a box, not a book, not hardware. A round mirror, identical to the one I found under the closet panel, except this one had no tarnish. Its edge gleamed like metal that had never been handled. Its glass surface looked clear even in the low yellow light. The mirror faced upward at me. I reached down with both hands and lifted it from its resting place. It weighed almost nothing. The surface reflected my face in a way that felt unnervingly accurate. Not like a common mirror. There was no blur, no softness, no distortion. The glass showed exactly what was there and exactly what wasn't. There was no background, only my face, as if the mirror excluded the room entirely. I carried it to the couch and sat with it, held in both hands. The house did not react. The air did not shift. It had delivered the object. Now it waited. I lifted the mirror and angled it toward the panel again. Inside the reflection, the inside of the vertical cavity was not empty anymore. A shape stood there. Not a figure, not a person, a silhouette of space, the outline of a presence filled with nothing. The interior of the mirror held the shape of someone who was not physically there, someone who had once belonged to the space before me. I lowered the mirror. The cavity was empty again. I looked around the room and felt a calm certainty rise like a simple truth. The house wasn't haunted. The house wasn't occupied. The house wasn't visited. The house was continuing someone. And now it wanted to continue through me. The objects under the closet had been the previous occupant's pattern, their physical remains of alignment, their agreement, their tools. This mirror was not theirs. This mirror was mine. I stood up slowly. A new lightness filled my hands and chest, like a weight had shifted inside my ribs. The panel in the wall closed behind me, not slammed, not shut like a trap closed, as if the hinge had returned to its rightful position after a correct move in a sequence. The picture frame remained on the blanket. The lamp flickered once, not to signal anything but to finalize the change of state. Stasis achieved. I packed my bag that morning without hurry. I folded my clothes in the exact order the house had shown me. Sweater on top, shirt beneath. I placed the mirror gently in the bag, facing upward. I left the key on the table without writing a note. When I stepped outside, the air had the neutrality of an airport gate, a place not concerned with the concept of destination. I locked the door behind me. The doorknob turned smooth. Nothing resisted. On the sidewalk, the world looked unchanged. Cars, mailboxes, people who carried groceries without knowing why one item weighed more than another. A stray cat sat under a hedge and stared at me in a still way. I walked to my car, opened the door, placed my bag on the passenger seat, and set the mirror on top of it, face up. The glass held only my outline and nothing else. I drove away at the same speed a person uses when leaving a store after buying something ordinary. I did not look back. And there was no moment, not one, where the house tried to pull me back, or call to me, or warn me. It didn't need to, because I understood now. The house wasn't a place. It was a continuing, something that selects, something that aligns, something that calibrates itself through people who recognize balance. I wasn't leaving. I was taking it with me. The house hadn't been waiting for someone to live inside it. It had been waiting for someone who could carry it out. Now, every room I enter, every shadow I rest in, every angle I correct with my hand, becomes part of its interior. I don't need to go back. I am the next interior now.